Welcome to Xara template tutorial lesson number 87. In this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about how to modify a full width website template from our store. And the reason I'm making this video is because I had a YouTube viewer request on how to modify one of our full width backgrounds. In this case, it's for our bakery website template, and that's the reason that I have this particular template open. So some of the things I'm going to talk about in this video is some of the rules that you should follow to ensure that you're able to properly make the changes to the website template in terms of its width and the layout. And I'm also going to talk about file names and making sure that there's a consistency across the board for the file names that are applied. And again, I'm going to show you how to make those modifications. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to go to File, Preview, Web Page, and I'm going to show you that in its basic state, it should show the website in full width. In other words, the background doesn't have any gaps on the edges of the screen. It takes up, it takes up the full width of the background from left to right. There's no gaps on the sides of the pages here. So let's go ahead and close that out. And I want to talk about the first rule, and that is never take this background and move it out of position. What I mean by out of position is don't adjust it except for vertically. Don't ever try to move it to the side like this or like that. If you do that, what's going to happen is if you go to Active File, Preview Web Page, it's going to ruin the layout. And you'll see that we've got this weird pattern going on here, and it just doesn't look right. So let's go ahead and close that. And the reason for that is because this background is a repeating pattern, and the CSS code has to repeat it from left to right, and if you move it out of position, it's not going to repeat in the proper order. So I'm going to undo that until I get back to the original state. So you always want to make sure that this background is left at its original positioning. And what I mean by that is if you look in the info bar under position where it says X and Y, in this case it's set to 0 for X and 0 for Y. Whatever it's set to by default when you open one of our website templates that's a full width, you want to make sure that it's always set to those particular numbers. And those X and Y positions represent something similar to a graph. If you were in maybe high school or something and you were looking at a graph with an X and Y on it, that means that X would represent left to right and Y would represent up and down if you're looking at a graph in high school. So make sure that it's set to 0, 0, which in this case will be the origin point, and you won't have any problems. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to adjust the layout for a given page. Let's say that for this blue section, you wanted it to be much smaller. So what you would do is you double left click and you hold down the control key and drag it down or up to however tall or small you want it. But the key here is if you look in your info bar, you'll notice that it's set to 1200 pixels wide. You don't want to adjust or change that width of this rectangle here. You want it to always be 1200 pixels because, as I mentioned earlier, this background is repeating from left to right, and if we adjust that width, it's going to mess up the repeat pattern. But first I'm going to show you that you can adjust this downward and it will make those calculations without any problem as long as you keep it at 1200 pixels wide. If I go back to File, Preview Web Page, you'll see that now it's adjusted that background to show properly. And if we click on Pastries page, you'll see that it still looks great. The pastry page doesn't have any blue parts in it, and you see that nothing's damaged there. And if we go back to home, everything still looks good, except for, it's got the blue part smaller, but that's not a problem. That's what we just made the changes for. But if we were to go back to our workspace and we were to drag this blue spark part in like that into our document, and we go to File, Preview Web Page, you'll see that now it looks kind of messed up. Something looks really wrong. And you'll notice that there's two copies of this blue rectangle in our background. And as I mentioned earlier, it repeats from left to right. Well, because I changed the pattern's distance, it created a gap. In other words, it's repeating this blue rectangle as many times as it can from left to right. Instead of doing it seamlessly like the other objects, it's repeating it in blocks because it's a smaller object in terms of it. I'm sorry. Give me one moment here. It's a smaller object in terms of its width. So hopefully you got that this time. And because of that, it's going to repeat that pattern from left to right. So let me go ahead and readjust this back and hold down the control key. And actually in this case you don't have to hold down the control key because we're adjusting it back from left to right. But once you get it back to 1200 pixels, and you'll know that if you look in your info bar, you'll see that it's set back to 1200 pixels. And now everything should show fine. If I go back to File, Preview Web Page, you'll see that it's got the proper pattern again. And just like the rest of our background, it repeats perfectly from left to right. And I apologize for me repeating words a couple times in this tutorial. This is probably one of my most difficult tutorials that I've ever tried to show in a video, so sometimes you might hear me stutter a little bit. So, and if I do, I'm sorry for that. If you have questions, don't hesitate to send me a message on YouTube if you didn't understand me, if I repeated something twice throughout this tutorial. But let's move on. The next thing that I want to talk about is duplicating a page. And let's say that I duplicate the home page, which is the index page, and I go to duplicate, and I make an exact copy. And in this case, we're going to name this page example. And this is just the file name of that page. It's not the actual SEO title. If you watch one of my tutorials on SEO, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is just changing the file name. So once you name that example, I want you to go back to the home page, and I want you to click on the background. You can click anywhere in the blue area and that'll select that full background. And I want you to select the name icon, and when you select that, it's going to bring up the names dialog. And we're about to talk about the file names now. And you'll see that the file name here says background_home. So basically what this is doing is it's giving this background image the file name background, and in this case background_home. And I want you to go ahead and close that out, and I want you to go to the example page, which is the second page, and click on this background and click on the name icon. It brings up the names dialog, and you'll see that it says file name equals background_home. So both of these images have the same file name, similar to as if you were saving two pictures on your computer and you gave them both the same file name. But if you tried to do that on your computer in the same folder, you would get an error. But when you're working with CSS code, it's not going to give you some kind of error prompt telling you that, oh, this is an error. You're not supposed to save two background images with the same file name and the same file type, because they're both an image. And the reason it doesn't give you that kind of error is because this is all hand coded, and it's not something that is built into the program. It's something that's been programmed into the website to allow it to show a full width background. And because of that, you're not going to get any special prompts to tell you, oh, you shouldn't do that. It could potentially be an error or a mistake. So what you would have to do, and I want to show you what's going to happen if I try to change actually this example page. Let's say that I try to adjust the blue part of this page, and actually, you know what? I'll make it even smaller instead of taller. Let's say that I make it a really small section of blue down there at the bottom, so it's very obvious. If we go back to the home page, you see that it's a much bigger area of blue space. And if I go to example, it's a much smaller area of blue space. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Preview, Website, and that's going to preview the whole full website. And when I do that, if you go down to the bottom of the page, you'll notice that the home page has a small blue rectangle, which we didn't change it for the home page. And if you go back, we actually need to look at it here and see, you'll see that it's not changed. But if you go to the example page, it's actually smaller. Well, what's happening is the CSS code is confused now because we have two backgrounds with a different layout with the same file name. So now it's confused about which image to choose. So it tries to figure it out, and whichever one it decides to pick, it's going to pick that one, and it's going to display that layout. And so that's why we get that problem. So what we need to do is on the example page, we need to go ahead and select the background. And I'm going to select the selection tool and select in the blue area. You can select in the black area too because it's part of the background. But when I select that background image, I'm going to click on the name icon, and under the names dialog, I'm going to actually remove this name that we applied. And the reason I'm removing it is because you don't want to rename it because it's gonna be connected with that home page. So if you, let's say for example, if I try to rename it, let's say I named it, background homes, and I put a Z on the end, and I rename that. And if we go back to the home page and we select the background, you'll see that it now has a Z on it. And you don't want that to happen. You don't want that second page to have the same name still. So that's the reason that you don't do that. So let's go ahead and go back to the example page, and I'm going to hit undo so that it undoes the step that I just completed. And if you select the background, it'll say background home again, and if you go back to the home page, it'll say background_home again. But in this case, when I go back to the example page and select it, I'm going to remove the names that were applied. So let's go ahead and hit remove, and it's going to remove that for the second page. And if you go back to the home page, you'll see that it still has the background_home. So with the second page background selected, we're going to go ahead and click in the apply name field, and we're going to type file name equals double quote example double quote, and then you're going to hit the add option, and then it's going to give it the file name equals example. And if we go back to the index or the home page and click on the background, you'll see that it says file name equals background_home. So they both have different file names now. But we're not done yet. On the example page that we just created, or the example background that we created for the second page, we want to go ahead and go to utilities, click on web properties, and under web properties, you're going to click on the page tab. And under the page tab, we're going to go to the section that says HTML code insertion and click on HTML code head, and it's going to bring up that CSS code that I've added to this website. And under that, you can click on any blank area space so that it doesn't highlight it blue. And you're going to look for the part that says background_home.jpg, and you want to change this, the background_home part, not the .jpg. We're not going to mess with that. We want to change that to example, and now it'll say example.jpg, and the JPG stands for JPEG. In other words, it's a JPEG image it's referencing. So this CSS code is looking for example.jpg or JPEG, and because the background image has been defined as a JPEG image, that's why that .jpg is there. But all you want to make sure is that the example part matches what we have in the names dialog. So if this said tutorial, file name equals tutorial, then this would say tutorial.jpg. So hopefully you're following what I'm saying there. So with that set to example.jpg, let's go ahead and hit OK, and let's go to image tab, and I'm going to show you why that's named .jpg. Well, I mentioned that it stands for JPEG, and under the web image type is set to JPEG, JPEG. So that's the reason that we name it .jpg, because under the image tab we have it set to JPEG. So I think I'm making sense here for you guys, and it's not too complicated. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Let's go ahead and close out the names dialog, and let's go ahead and set a link for Weddings Cake, and we're going to click in the URL field and go to link to, and you should already know how to do this if you've watched some of my previous tutorials on how to link stuff. And under the link to option, you're going to set it to example and hit OK, and then hit OK. And we're going to click on the home page, go back to the index home page, and then go to File, Preview Website. And you'll notice that the changes haven't taken place. You'll see that the home page is ruined. But what you need to do is, before you preview that, hit Control S, and that's going to save all your changes, and that's going to tell the program to update to show the proper CSS information to link to the images. So if we go to File, Preview Website now, you'll see that everything looks correct. And sometimes it'll work without having to hit save, and other times it won't. So my recommendation is, if you change the layout, hit Control S to save your changes so that it'll update the program to recognize that the information for the CSS has been changed. And then once that's recognized, your page will look fine for the home page. And if we click on Wedding Cakes, you'll see that the blue rectangle at the bottom looks proper. There's no problems with it. It's just a small blue rectangle. So that's how you modify the layouts for your website templates if you're using one of ours. And the same thing would apply if you change the color. If you, let's say you double left clicked on, the image color, and you double clicked on that blue section and you wanted to change it, and let's say we go to the color editor and we change that to a different color. We change it to like green, and you were to go to the next page, and well, no, I'm sorry. If you change that to green and you duplicated it like this, and you wanted to make this second page that we just duplicated a different color, let's say we want to make it like a red, what you would need to do is you would have to do that same process. If you change the color on this page, you would now need to give this new page that we made a different file name using the name tag icon that I showed you before. So basically you need to follow the same process. I'm not going to do it again for the sake of keeping this tutorial short, but you would follow that same process if you change the color of one of your background images, like part of your background image. So hopefully you're following me in what I'm saying there. But if you have any questions or you're not able to fully understand everything I just showed you in this tutorial, just shoot me a message on YouTube and I will try to answer your question the best way that I can. And there is one other thing that I do want to show you before we finish here, and that is how to adjust the page size. And I'm going to undo so that we can go back to just having 3 pages and also setting the color back to its original color. So once we do that, let's talk about adjusting the page height. Let's say that since we duplicated this second page, it now has a different name. If you were trying to change the page height of the example page, that same process would need to be repeated. Not repeated again, but like it would need to be repeated if you duplicate a page and you give it a different page height. So if you have different page heights, each page that has a different page height needs to be given that process applied to it so that you're able to change the page height. So let's say that for example, I want to change this page height. Since it already has its own name applied to it, in this case, if we go to the name tag icon, you'll see that it has file name equals example. Since we already gave it its own name, we don't have to do that for this one because it already has that applied. We can adjust the page height downward some, and I did that a little bit too big. I don't want it quite that tall. But what you would do is you would double click on the footer, and you would move that down, and I usually hold the shift key and press the down arrow key. That way it can move in bigger increments, and then I hold the Alt key and press down to move in smaller increments. And then I would double left click the blue bar while holding down the shift key. I would not left click, but I press down the arrow key to move in bigger increments. And then I press the Alt key to move in smaller increments to get it precisely where I want it, and that would adjust the page height. So now we have a different page height for page 2 versus page 1. And you'll see that if you look on screen here that this one is a much taller page. So anytime that you want to change the page height, if you duplicate a page, you need to follow that process that I showed you basically. But if you've already named it, duplicated the page and renamed all the things like they're supposed to be, you can adjust the page height and it won't affect the other pages. So let me show you that right quick. If you go to File, Preview Website, and you were to click on the weddings cake option, you'll see that it's a much taller page, but everything looks fine. And if you click on the home page, it's a much smaller page, but everything looks great. So the only time that you have to follow that process that I showed you is when you're changing the layout of the page. If you're changing the colors for the page, you want to apply that process. But that's if you duplicate a page. Like if you duplicate a page, it's going to obviously duplicate the name of the page in terms of its background. So if you duplicate the page and you want to change any of those factors, you want to make sure that you go through the process that I showed you. So hopefully you're understanding. If you don't, again, you can send me a message on YouTube and I'll do my best to help you. If this video was helpful, give us thumbs up, subscribe, embed, and I hope that you stay tuned for future tutorials. Have a great day.